And of course, if you think about giving, we probably naturally think of like, oh, we think of something more grand. I'm going to give a gift to somebody or something that's maybe out of the ordinary. But there's another way of looking at it where actually every moment is an opportunity to give. It could even be a gift that indirectly is benefiting somebody else. I like to think about this with attention and interactions, to view my attention as a gift and just like keeping my phone in my pocket and just saying like, for this next 5 minutes while I'm talking to this person, I'm giving them the gift of my attention. I'm just going to be as much as I can totally there with them. And that's a gift I'm giving. And so it's almost like this inner space where you're just viewing that sense of abundance and wanting to share with
Yeah.
others. I'm curious what you
Yeah.
think. And
I
maybe
love,
we can
I
do, yeah.
love, I love that. And I love how you put it. And I feel exactly the same way. I mean, I think there is a gift of presence and we can choose to, to give that gift and people feel it, and do really receive it in most cases as a gift.
Hello, Richie, and hello, everyone. Great to be back with you. I'm Cortland Dahl, and I'm here with the brilliant neuroscientist, Richie Davidson. So, Richie, as a little prelude to our discussion, which is very timely, we're here in the middle of the holidays, and I think we both wanted to talk about the neuroscience and the contemplative practice of giving. And I was just thinking about this in my own life, and I had this memory of being a little kid in the holidays. And, there's this time of life, I'm sure it's something many of us remember, where you just can't wait to run down and, see what presents are waiting for you and, just dive into that whole experience. And I remember like I couldn't even sleep, I would just, I couldn't, I'd go terrorize my parents by getting up at 3 a.m. and dragging them out there, or them telling me that, no, it's not time yet. And just like the excitement about that. And then thinking as I got older, and again, I'm sure this is something many of us experience, kind of the excitement begins to wear off a little bit. And at a certain point, it's kind of this very slow shift. It's almost as though the shift is less about what am I going to get, and it's more about the joy of giving. Like now, like honestly, I could care less. Like people ask me what I want. I'm like, I don't know, like a sweater. Like I don't know what I want, but I love the joy of actually seeing the smile on my son's face, or getting something from my wife that she might really cherish. And so there's kind of like this gradual shift. And I think we wanted to talk a little bit about that today, like what's really going on there? What is the wholesome part of giving, and how can we get perhaps the positive part of receiving without getting too caught up in, getting fixated on getting and receiving all the time? But I think especially what's really going on with giving. Why is it so nourishing, and how can we perhaps strengthen that part of ourselves that is oriented to giving? So what do you remember? What kind of springs to mind in your experience when you think about this?
Yeah, so thank you. First of all, it's great to be here with you just before the holiday talking about this. And yeah, I certainly have childhood memories of the holiday period and memories from when I was a very young child, reflecting on what I would get. And then, I do very much also remember this shift to really rejoicing in the giving. And that may have coincided with having children and pleasure, witnessing their pleasure. And, of course, in the Buddhist framework, you know better than I do, but we have this concept of mudita, or sympathetic joy. And it's kind of a positive empathy. It's resonating with another person's joy.
Yeah,
And
it's so great that that's like a central practice in the Buddhist tradition. It's taking delight in other people's positive experiences and qualities.
Yeah. And, as an academic, it's so interesting to reflect on this because the academy is, um, for the most part, the antithesis of this. When you think about the kind of competition and jealousy that just infects most of the academy, it's rare to see genuine joy on the part of someone when their colleague, for example, wins a big award or gets a major publication or receives a big grant. Um, it's much more often associated with a kind of self focus and thinking about why, you haven't been the one to receive that or why they and not you.
Mm, mm.
And so it's such an important topic and quality, and something that I think when we just even give it casual reflection, it's really relevant to our daily lives.
Yeah, and it's one thing that we've talked about in previous episodes. I'm sure it'll be a theme we come back to again and again because it's such a huge part of our own lives. Is the sense of being of service, and giving is such a central part of that. And it's always been interesting to me as just that this has been such a big part of my meditation practice. It's such a big part of the Buddhist approach to meditation more generally. And I've been fascinated by the mental and emotional state that giving or even imagining giving puts us in. And in particular, how it puts us in touch with in an inner sense of abundance. And it's made me see clearly also how the fixation on getting, which you kind of imagine the kid making out your wish list and all the things you want, that the mindset of that is the opposite of abundance. It's like the mindset of scarcity. It's the assumption of not having enough. Whereas when you give, it just, you don't even think about this overtly, but it just naturally puts you in this inner space where you're kind of overflowing. You have enough to give, you have enough to share. And so it's almost as though you're practicing abundance. And for that very reason, the practice of generosity in the Buddhist tradition is primarily framed as the inner state. It's not just the action, which of course is important, but it's the inner space of that abundance that you practice. And if you have that, the outward act of giving becomes natural. And you're also ensuring that it's not like self-serving giving, like you're giving just so somebody else will do something back to you. So anyways, it's just kind of fascinating, that just kind of the mechanics of it.
Yeah, no, I think that that's so important, and in my own practice as well, it's that's been such an important theme, and when it was one of the attractions to me in the path that I now follow, the Tibetan Buddhist path, that this is such a central element, and being able to frame one's entire practice as a form of giving.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is,
Like you're meditating as an act of generosity to the world, to
exactly.
your
That's
family, to people you interact with.
Yeah, and I'll often say, putting our butt on the cushion, that's a radical act of generosity. Because we invoke the intention that it's really not primarily about us, about ourselves, but it's really so that we can be uh, better with others. We can serve others more effectively. We can do our work to serve others, to help others, to benefit others. And that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, and it might seem abstract. I mean, I think you could say, like, it might seem weird for somebody who hasn't thought about this or hears that for the first time. Like, okay, yeah, that's a nice thought to say I'm sitting down and meditating for others, but really, like, it just might sound like, kind of hollow words. But one thing you always say, which is so true, and is in many ways kind of the basis for this, is the idea that flourishing is contagious. And if you imagine that, say you sit down for that 20 minutes and you meditate, whether it's just you're a little bit more centered or you've cultivated a little kindness or a little bit more wisdom and insight, you're going to get up and go about your day. And if you compare it to if you hadn't done that, and you just imagine that the ripple effect of how you are in your interactions and how you are in all of the stressful ups and downs of daily life, like that's just going to have a ripple effect for good or, positively or negatively. So you're just ensuring that you're infecting people with positive mental and emotional states versus your stressed out, neurotic
Absolutely.
mental and emotional states, which unfortunately is a lot of the time for many of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've done this in, large group settings where I'm giving a big public talk and just had people do a little practice. And it's amazing how little kind of nudge we need to get this part of our mind and our heart going and the power that that has. And this is, not to say that we think that this is going to last just from this little practice. I don't think any of us really believe that. But when you remember to do this all the time, when you do it every day, multiple times a day, then it does accumulate.
Hmm.
And then there is, I think, a shift from what we call a state effect to a trait effect, where this becomes more enduring and more available spontaneously.
So how do you, if we look at the micro moments, I mean, you and I talk about micro practices, micro supports all the time. And of course, if you think about giving, we probably naturally think of like, oh, we think of something more grand. I'm going to give a gift to somebody or something that's maybe out of the ordinary. But there's another way of looking at it where actually every moment is an opportunity to give. Even if you're alone, you can just think of what you're doing in the moment. It could even be a gift to yourself or a gift that indirectly is benefiting somebody else. I like to think about this with tension and interactions, to view my attention as a gift and just like keeping my phone in my pocket and just saying like, for this next 5 minutes while I'm talking to this person, I'm giving them the gift of my attention. I'm just going to be as much as I can totally there with them. And that's a gift I'm giving. And so it's almost like this inner space where you're just viewing that sense of abundance and wanting to share with
Yeah.
others. I'm curious what you
Yeah.
think. And
I love
moving,
I
yeah, yeah.
love I love that, and I love how you put it, and I feel exactly the same way. I mean, I think there is a gift of presence, and we can choose to give that gift, and people feel it, and do really receive it in most cases as a gift.
And it
Um,
feels good. Yeah. I mean, to be on the receiving end of that, it feels so good, actually.
totally.
Just as it feels bad, when somebody's just tuned out or their attention is divided or, whatever else might be going on.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's super powerful. And I reflect on that consciously. I mean, when I'm with a person, when I'm meeting a person for this first time, I really make a conscious decision to be fully there as much as I'm able. And I think that is very much a gift, and it feels good to be fully present in that way. And there are, simple mechanical things that we can do to help that, like, as you suggest, not take out your phone and so forth, which I think, is useful and does help. And I think it's important that the root of it come from this inner cultivation that we can learn to do.
So how does giving stack up against receiving when it comes to well-being and flourishing? And do we know much about what's going on in the brain if we compare those two states? I mean, I know there's obviously a whole world of research on pro-social giving and things like that. I mean, how would you summarize some of what we know from a scientific perspective?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, they're both behavioral studies and neuroscientific studies. And the to summarize across a lot of different kinds of scientific literature, the data clearly show that giving leads to more sustained positive emotion than receiving. Um, and that's, I mean, that itself is super important and really cool. And there are many examples of this, but one of the kind of prototypical studies is this kind of crazy sort of study that social psychologists do. And one famous example is, if you bring a person into a laboratory in the morning and give them $100 and say that their instruction is to go and, we all have had, we all, there are things that we all consider that we may want, but we often say to ourselves, well, it's too expensive to buy that for ourselves, but here's $100. And the only requirement is that you spend all the money on yourself. So go buy yourself gifts for the day and then come back at the end of the day. A second group that's randomly assigned to these groups is given the same $100 and said, many people want to buy gifts for other people. They may not be able to afford it. Here's $100. The only requirement is that you can't spend any of this money on yourself. You need to spend it on others to buy them gifts. And at the end of the day, they come back and they take some surveys that are the same as the surveys they took in the morning. And of course, guess which group shows the largest elevation in happiness and well-being? And of course, that's the group that is instructed to buy presents for others, to use the money on others, not on themselves. And this is a very consistent finding.
I just had a very recent version of this. So I was in Minneapolis just last weekend visiting my son who's in school there and where I grew up. And I was on campus and I just went out to lunch. I was going to go see him and had a little time, so I went to get lunch um, and there was a homeless guy right outside the restaurant. And I at first just kind of walked by him and went in the restaurant, and then I thought, oh, maybe I'll go and see if he wants a meal, and if there's anything I could do. So I walked back out and I just talked to him for a few minutes, and it turns out he said actually he had just eaten and like didn't he said no, and he was very nice. We talked for a little bit, but he said no, I don't need a meal, but I really appreciate it. And so we talked for a little bit, and I just asked him a few things and had a very nice interaction. And then I went back in, but I still had this feeling like, oh, I wish I could do something for him. And then I thought, okay, well, I'll just, I'll give him, I'll see what I have in my wallet, and I'll just give him some money. And so I looked in my wallet, and there was only $100 bill. And I immediately had this thought of like, ooh, like kind of like, okay, I want to give. I don't know if I want to give that much. And then I thought, okay, that's like a lot of money. And, I'm not exactly rolling in the dough where I'm just throwing $100 bills around. But I thought, okay, this is what this moment has given me. And this will just make, I don't know, maybe it'll make his day. And so I went back out there and I handed it to him and he took it, and we'd already talked. So we already, had kind of a warm interaction. And then he looked at it and I just saw it really clearly did make his day, and his eyes lit up and he took my hand and he was like, thank you so much. And anyways, we just had this kind of amazing, even right now, I kind of have goosebumps. I still have like this warm glow about the experience. Like even like there's a little like physical endorphin. I don't know what it is, something kind of happening in my mind and body right now. But there's something interesting in this because if you compare that to getting, and I think back to, when being a kid and that like you can't wait to get whatever it is that you're fixated on, that warm glow tends to wear off pretty quickly.
Oh,
When we get things that we want, it doesn't matter how much we've been, pursuing them, they so quickly just become normal. Like they're just like, oh, now we have it. And kind of that the chase is done. The warm glow wears off so quickly. And then it's just like, oh, it's just this thing, almost like we've always had it. Whereas when it comes to giving, it kind of doesn't wear off. Like it has somehow it endures and lingers in a different way. I'm curious if there's, yeah,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the first of all, it's a wonderful story. I love that. And, in terms of the scientific sort of speculations about it, when we are anticipating receiving something and we receive it, and as you are saying, which is, consistent with the scientific evidence, our pleasure following receipt of that tends to really be short-lived, wears off very quickly. Part of it is the brain is very much a prediction machine. And so we predict or we have an expectation of receiving something. And once that expectation is met,
It's like you're back to baseline.
yeah, exactly. You go right back to baseline. And so I think there is a neuroscience around this that would lead you to expect that indeed these pleasure signals will be incredibly short-lived. With regard uh, to giving, it may be that when we give, particularly in the example that you gave, I think it's probably fair to say, as you implied at the beginning, that you don't give out $100 bills that often. And so there wasn't an expectation that you're going to give this guy $100. There may not even be an
There was a
expectation.
negative expectation. I think there was an expectation if I'd
Yeah.
open my wallet and be like, "Oh, there's a $5 bill," and I'd, go on my way, and yeah, so
Yeah.
it's
But even
different than
that,
what
you
yeah.
probably, I mean, I don't know how often you would give money to a homeless person. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, depending on the
Yeah,
circumstances.
same with me. I can't say, like, I always do. I sometimes do
Yeah.
and sometimes don't.
So, I think that the sort of prediction in the scientific lingo, we call this the prediction error or the discrepancy between what you predict and what actually happens. On the giving end, it's probably less certain than on the receiving end, where if there's a specific thing that you are seeking and you get whatever it is you're seeking, that is a confirmation of the prediction, and then you're going to go right back down to baseline.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, another element of this too is, as I was thinking, knowing we were gonna have this conversation, a few things came to mind. That childhood memory came to mind. Another thing that came to mind is just something I've practiced a lot. I'm sure you have as well, but has been so illuminating about the power of giving, and in some respects, how counterintuitive it is the practice of Tonglen. So, for those of you listening who haven't heard of this, there's a well-known Tibetan Buddhist practice. The Tibetan term is Tonglen. Literally means sending and taking. And what you do in this practice is as you breathe out, you imagine you're just sending anything positive that you have. It can be, you kind of imagine it in the form of light, like radiating out. It could be to another person. It could be to all beings. It could be to somebody who's suffering. It could be to a group of people. You're just kind of using your imagination. But you're not just sending good things, you're sending your good things. If you have good health, you're giving it away. If you have abundance, you're giving it away. If you have a lot of good things in your life, you're imagining you're giving all that away. And then not only are you doing that, but as you breathe in, you're using your imagination and you're imagining like you're breathing in this dark vapor, and you are using that as almost like a symbolic way, as though you're taking on all of negative things, like their ill health, their challenges, their whatever negative things are in their life, that you're actually relieving them of those things. And not just that, you're actually taking it into yourself. And I remember when I first heard of this practice and somebody was explaining it, I immediately thought, I think they just got that wrong. Like, they they spoke incorrectly. They meant you send out all the crap you don't like and you breathe in all the goodness, because just intuitively my mind just could not compute why on earth you would ever do that. But indeed, although it's totally counterintuitive, when you do it, it makes you fearless. It makes you feel like you can just handle anything. You have enough that you can give anything away, and you are strong enough that you can take anything on. It puts you in this, when you really do this deeply as a practice, it gets at some deep rooted fear, and it kind of dissolves the feeling of the kind of inner poverty mentality. And it puts us in touch with this sense of strength and abundance, that although it like goes against the normal ego logic, it's kind of remarkable of what that does to the psyche in some way. And I could imagine there must be really interesting things going on in the brain throughout that whole process. But you've done this practice. I don't know if you've thought about it from a
Yeah, I
scientific
mean, I
perspective, but
have, and when I first heard about it before I really practiced it, I had the same thought that you did, that, this must be reversed.
Yeah, why
Um,
would I ever do this?
but yeah, I mean, I've practiced this a fair amount, and I love the practice, and it is extremely nourishing. And one of the things I wanted to mention, which is at least indirectly related to Tonglen, and that is when you do Tonglen, part of it is uh, to pick up and be sensitive to whatever the negative components are that you're taking in. And one thing you might say is that this actually helps us to be better detectors of suffering in others.
Hmm.
Um, and so when we detect the suffering in others, we can more spontaneously generate compassion and help to relieve the suffering. If we don't see the suffering in others, we're not going to be able to do anything about it because we won't know that it's
It
really.
makes me think of that interesting finding that I think can sound counterintuitive at first, that psychopaths have very small amygdalae, like
Yeah.
that
So that's
they're,
one. Yeah.
which it seems like, and that people who are altruists have large amygdala, like, which is in this case the amygdala is has something to do with that emotion detection, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I was going to mention this work. It's the work of Abigail Marsh, who's at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., social neuroscientist. And she's done really some very innovative work in a group of people that she calls extraordinary altruists. And the way she defines extraordinary altruists for this research are people who have donated a kidney to an unrelated individual. And I think most viewers would agree that this is a
That
case
is
of extraordinary
that is pretty
altruism.
dang altruistic.
Yeah. And it turns out that these people who donate kidneys to unrelated individuals actually have larger amygdala than
Hmm.
others.
Which is funny because I feel like the headline about the amygdala is it's fear, anxiety. People think of it as like it's like the bad boy of the brain or something.
Exactly. And this is a good sort of little mini lesson in not thinking overly simplistically about brain regions. And the likely interpretation of this is that the amygdala is playing a really important role in helping these people to see the suffering in others, and is also helping them to be motivated to do something about that suffering once they detect it. Um, and so, uh, um, so that's really, I think, a very insightful finding. And the opposite of it is what you alluded to also, Court, that psychopaths, people who um, don't feel a lot of guilt and who engage in various kinds of antisocial behavior. And by the way, that can actually occur not just in criminals, but actually in leaders. So the interesting question that Abigail Marsh studied in these psychopaths is what is their amygdala showing? And these are people for whom the amygdala is smaller, and so they're presumably less likely to be disturbed, if you will, by the suffering of others. They're
So it's
less.
almost like a blindness to even, like, they're not even, it's not that they're registering it and they don't care. It's like they're not even registering it. It's almost
Exactly.
like their detecting mechanism is broken or something. Or
Exactly, exactly. So they're less likely to detect it. And, in some sense, that's a useful finding in helping to actually engender compassion for these people, because rather than just sort of criticizing them and saying they're bad people, this helps us understand that maybe they're simply, it's a blind spot. They just can't see the suffering of others. And that's really what is leading them to behave in a callous way, but it's not because they're seeing people suffering and then choosing not to respond. They just don't see it in the first place.
so this is in a way, sometimes we talk about these categories, and especially when we talk about cases like this, where we have this category of extraordinary altruists on the one hand, and now we're talking about psychopaths. And it sounds like we're just in these categories, and maybe all of us are somewhere in between those two. But of course, maybe the more nuanced finding is that we're all probably somewhere on this spectrum, and it's movable. Like we might have a predisposition to be towards one side or the other. We might find it easier to tune in to the emotional experience of others and to have that impulse to give and share. Or it might be harder for some of us. But wherever we are in that spectrum, it's trainable to some degree. And maybe we could end that on that conversation. And again, going back to the holidays, how we can view giving as a practice and how nourishing that can be and obviously beneficial for others. If we kind of view it not as a we have it or we don't kind of thing, but we view it actually as a practice and something that we get used to and cultivate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, these brain networks are networks that exhibit plasticity. They change in response to experience, and they change in response to training. And we've seen that in our own research. Other scientists have shown that. And in fact, in one of our very early studies with very long term practitioners, and this was a study that included Mingyur Rinpoche and Matthew Ricard as participants, in one study, we had them generating compassion with compassion meditation, and one of the ways we probed that is to challenge the meditation period by presenting sounds of human suffering. So we presented cries and screams. These were nonverbal sounds, but we wanted to be able to present something during a meditation period that didn't require them to look at something. So we used the auditory modality. It was very convenient to do this. And one of the remarkable things that we found, which we really, at the time we first found it, we didn't really know how to best interpret it, but we found increased amygdala activation
Hmm.
to the sounds of human suffering. And so it's as if the generating compassion was tuning up um, the networks in the brain which are sensitive to suffering so that we are more likely to act when that suffering is encountered.
How do you, just out of curiosity, how in that case do you differentiate this more healthy adaptive aspect of amygdala activation, where it's part of detecting the emotional experience of others and empathy, from something like anxiety or aversion? Because you could imagine you hear a scream, and for some, it might provoke anxiety or aversion. Is it different parts of the amygdala, or is like how do you discern like what
Yeah,
you're inferring in terms of the emotional experience?
it's a great question. And uh, there are two answers. The first answer is we don't really know. Uh, um, uh, because just there's still a lot to be discovered about this, but I think there is some suggestion that the primary difference is going to be in the timing. So
Hmm.
that in these long-term practitioners, there's a transient increase in amygdala activation, but it doesn't linger. It sort of alerts the system, if you will. There's suffering that's encountered, but very different than empathy, which is feeling the emotions of another. If you're feeling the emotions of another, your amygdala would stay activated as this is going on. Whereas with the long-term practitioners, it's just an initial activation, and then it comes back down to baseline.
And I would imagine, I mean, tell me if this is true. I don't know if this particular study showed this, but I would imagine the patterns of co-activation would also be different. That, like, if you imagine somebody having an aversive response, like fear or anxiety, and another person having the reaction, but it's more care and compassion, both of them are activating the amygdala. But in one case, it might be like the medial orbital frontal cortex, for example, like part of the care network. For somebody else, it might be the pain matrix or something else related to kind of a
Yeah.
more aversive type empathy. Is that true?
Yes. Yes, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
So maybe we could just end on our practice note, because I know this is a big theme for both of our practice, and share kind of what each of us what we do in our own lives. Maybe to highlight a few things we've already shared. One thing that I've found really helpful is to shift perspective on just routine daily things and view them through the lens of giving and generosity. In some cases, that might be just a matter of shifting how I'm viewing something, like I'm doing my dishes and just viewing it as a gift so my wife can come home and not have to deal with a dirty kitchen or something like that. But in some cases, it might actually shift what I do. Like I just do it differently, or, something else comes out of it that would have been different had I not shifted my perspective in that way. So that's one thing. We gave the example of giving your attention as a gift, another version of this, but it's almost just like these little moments of giving and the giving perspective and scattering that throughout the day. So that's one of the things that I found super helpful. I'm curious for you, Richie, are there any
Yeah, I
rituals
mean,
or
I think for me, what you describe is also really super important. And I've created some rituals, sort of daily rituals in our house about that. We have a cat,
I
and
was going to say the you have your cats are the beneficiaries of your
yeah,
generosity.
yeah, I'm the one who scoops the litter every night. I remember there was a time in my life where I kind of, why am I the one who has to do this every day? I don't feel that at all anymore. I love doing it. It's like this is my gift. It's an
Yeah,
act.
it becomes nourishing, like it
It
becomes almost
does. I
rejuvenating
actually look
somehow.
forward to it, and, there are times, if it's late at night and I haven't done it yet, my wife would offer to do it, and I say, "No, I'd rather do it myself," just because I actually really enjoy it, and taking out the garbage is another one. I mean, just really little things of that kind. And then more regularly in daily life, really being attentive to saying thank you and the gift of presence, really showing up and being fully present when you're meeting someone, for example, for the first time. Those are little things that if you become aware of them, there are just a plethora of opportunities every single day.
Yeah, almost everything, there's something you can find in it
Yeah,
that could be linked to giving and generosity.
yeah,
Yeah. So that for it sounds like for both of us, that's just making that not even a daily ritual, but almost something you return to many times throughout the day. Another one that I found very powerful, it's linked to this practice of Tonglen is an example of this, is more about formal meditation. And it is using imagination as a way to almost to take away the limits on generosity. And you can do things with your imagination that do two things. One, it can dramatically change the way our kind of mental and emotional conditioning around giving. We all have our own habitual patterns and family stuff and life experience around money, for example, around relationships, around all these things that oftentimes are where we feel more vulnerable and we have protective mechanisms and we might be less than generous because we feel, whatever that conditioning might be. So imagining giving on the vast scale, it's like a non-threatening way to work with that conditioning. So there's practices that you know well, like another example in addition to Tonglen is called the mandala offering. And basically you're just imagining every wonderful thing, not even things you have, but just like imagine if you got inconceivable wealth and then you give it away. Imagine if you just had the perfect relationship and you give it away. Imagine if you had the most amazing friends and you just give them like you just like the most amazing things and you just multiply it, like you use your imagination. And again, like with Tonglen, it sounds weird if you haven't done it, but when you do it, something changes. Like it does something deep, deep in our kind of our psychological and emotional programming.
yeah.
And of course, it's powerful as a meditation, but then in your rest of your life, it does something too in terms of your ability to feel confident and to give generously when you're out in the world.
Yeah. And, I just want to add that, and I've done that mandala practice and have experienced the kind of changes that you're describing. And I just want to point out for our viewers that, to the best of my knowledge, maybe Court, but to the best of my knowledge, there's not a single scientific paper that's ever been done studying this mandala practice.
Yeah.
Not
No,
one.
I don't know of anything either. It would be great to look like just at a dedicated
Yeah,
period of practice.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's great. So yeah, it maybe goes back to another theme in our discussions, which are there many practices. Like we think about mindfulness. Mindfulness is fantastic, very powerful, but it's one of many forms of meditative and contemplative practice. So we're kind of talking here about a whole family that maybe you could put in the connection space, and it's even a subcategory of the connection space, which is around giving, generosity, being of
Oh.
service. So there's so many ways you can practice this, meditation certainly being one of them, but so powerful. So maybe we can end here. Any parting thoughts for the holidays?
Well, one of the things that we do in our meditation practice always, no matter how short or long the practice is, at the end of the practice, we dedicate. And when we say we dedicate is one way to think about it is we reflect on what we may have gleaned from our time together that may be of benefit, and we sort of make a commitment with ourselves that we're going to bring this out into the world for the benefit of others. And since we're talking now about giving, I think that it would be really great for viewers to reflect on this dedication, and if there are things that you may have gleaned from our time together that would be, you think, helpful to dedicate that for the benefit of others as you encounter them in your daily life.
A beautiful note to end on. And yeah, to echo that, we would love to hear from you as well. So please share your own experience if you have your own examples of some of the things we've talked about or any things that have sparked your imagination, or especially if you actually try this out for yourself and practice this in the days and weeks to come. We would love for you just to hear your experience with that and to share that with the community of all those who are part of this Dharma Lab community that is emerging. So, Richie, as always, an honor, a privilege, a delight to spend a little time with you. Thank you for all of you who so generously shared your time with us. We wouldn't have the opportunity to have these conversations were it not for you. So, we hope you have a wonderful holiday season filled with love and generosity. And we look forward to seeing you soon at another episode of Dharma Lab. So, take care.
Thank you.